Interlude, The Twilight of the Republic, an essay. RK equals 25,000 years. It has a nice ring to it, does it not? That was how long the Republic has existed in one form or another. 25,000 years. That is longer than many of the no-sapient species across the galaxy had enjoyed the benefits of a technological civilization, longer than many civilizations recorded history. It is a great number, so great in fact that the organic minds able to fully comprehend it both intellectually or emotionally, much less both, are few and far between in a galaxy of countless souls. In that span of time, the Republic has faced many enemies, both internal and external. It had won many struggles, lost some, it has even been destroyed on multiple occasions only to rise up from the ashes. There had been very few constants in this eternity it has existed. The most important one is that more often than not, the Republic had enjoyed a status of undisputed regional, later galactic hegemon. External enemies came and went, most of them had been consigned to the annals of history and forgotten by all but dedicated historians. What has always remained the same is that the primary strategic threat, source of rivalry and competition for many of the various Republic members, especially in the core, had been their compatriots within the Republic instead of any of the countless threats the Republic as a whole had faced. This unpleasant reality had always been compounded by the simple fact that the Republic had never been a real nation, even if during various periods of its history it has done a great job to foster such feelings among its far-flung citizenry. Recently, this fact was firmly illustrated by the infamous Naboo crisis, where one Republic member, the Trade Federation, invaded another, the pacifist planet of Naboo. We all know how the Senate reacted. There was no universal condemnation of the aggression. In fact, first the Senate couldn't officially, and thus legally, agree that there had been an invasion in the first place even when Queen Amidala, the elected monarch of Naboo, came to beg her case in front of the full Senate Assembly. There were denials, calls for proof, demands for the Senate to form a commission, which was to investigate if the claims of invasion were genuine, before the Senate could begin to even discuss a course of action. Something like this couldn't have happened within an equal body of any functional nation, no matter if it planetary, system-wide, or if it encompassed multiple systems or even sectors. For many citizens, even whole governments, the impotency of the Senate they just witnessed was a proof that the system was fundamentally broken. At best, that there was a bug in the system, one that had to be fixed. I would argue to the contrary. The Senate being locked down into inaction was no bug, it was a feature. Something like that happening was a safety valve, a legal and peaceful way for Republic members to block, veto if you will, decisions which they would find unacceptable in a way that bought more time for diplomacy and negotiations to run their course. The reason was simple: not all Republic members are equal, neither in population, nor in industry, much less in soft and hard power. Kuat, Corellia, Alcasan, Anaxes, Coruscant, and many, many others, no matter if they were individual systems, leaders of alliances spanning whole sectors, with all that entailed, or certain individual planets holding incredible power and influence compared to most regular Republic members, there were many powers within the Republic which stood apart. They weren't even first among equals, they played and still play on a whole different league compared to the average Republic member. The fact is, that the Republic wouldn't exist in its current form, in any form that we would really recognize, if it wasn't for the consent and participation of these powers. Despite the attempts of certain chancellors and political blocs to reform the Republic and diminish the power of such entities, over the centuries and millennia, they had met with only short-lived success. The last such attempt was nearly 1,000 years ago during the Rusan Reformation, which shaped the Republic which we know today. To many of those powers, a system that could force terms upon them by simply outvoting them would have been unacceptable. It would have been viewed as an avenue to be exploited by their rivals by enticing, bribing and threatening third parties into voting the right or wrong way to achieve their agenda. Or an avenue they could use against their competitors provided that said competition consented on becoming a part of the Republic. On the other hand, giving outright veto power to said entities would have been too disruptive, perhaps even disastrous for the Republic as a whole. It would have been a constant, blatant reminder to all smaller member states, and especially their citizens, that individually their votes didn't count for much if anything at all. Yet the truth is that it would have been extremely hard and ruinously costly to force terms on systems like Kuat and Corellia at the best of times, and that is before taking into account their individual networks of close allies. Between their wealth, industrial and military capacity, there is very little the Republic could actually do to them if they declined to comply with a Senate directive. In fact, the results could have been catastrophic for everyone involved. For the longest time, such potentially disastrous confrontations had been sidestepped by a simple expedient. Within the legal framework of the Republic, there are levers that allow its member states to tie down the Senate in red tape for years, perhaps even decades, and thus shelve away decisions that they find unacceptable. In theory, large majority within the Senate backing a strong chancellor could resolve such deadlocks in a relatively short amount of time. In practice, the Republic hadn't had a powerful chancellor in centuries, because the powers of the post had been slowly eroded and bound with an ever-increasing number of legal tightropes. This crude analysis begs the question, why did the Republic last as long as it did, if it could be made into a dysfunctional mess by any of its many member states on a whim? Simply put, it was generally too useful to discard. It brought an unprecedented age of peace and prosperity, one that was felt most acutely across the core. However, now that the Naboo crisis is behind us, the crack in the system had become very much visible for the whole galaxy to see. There is an increasing number of mid- and outer-rim systems, which chafe under the laws and status quo imposed by the dominant core. That in itself is an old sentiment. There had always been some amount of strife between the core, the old colonies, and those who made up the periphery at the time. The primary difference nowadays is that, with the obvious exception of the unknown regions, the galaxy has been explored to its economic limit. Colonization of new worlds had been slowing down since before the new Sith Wars, and the systems on the fringe of the Republic had grown, both in population and industry. Yet, they are still on the outside. They still are either sources of resources to feed the ravenous appetite of the core's industry or mere transit hubs denied a large percentage of the tariffs and taxes many of their equivalents deeper within the Republic gather. Barring a reform, there is the potential for the chasm between the core of the Republic and its outlying regions to grow until the situation becomes untenable. This is an issue which needs to be addressed in the coming decades and centuries before the Outer Rim grows powerful and desperate enough to seek an extra-legal redress of a status quo that hasn't served its interests for a long time now. RK equals Interlude, Jedi Master Rancisis equals RK equals. From the Journal of Jedi Master Oppo Rancisis, recovered during Operation Headhunter, there are days I can hardly recognize the Jedi Order anymore. We are working with a Sith. A damned Sith. As if that wasn't enough, there are young impressionable Padawans and even knights who are taking notice and, if I'm not wrong, are ready to take that madman as a role model. Can't Yoda and the rest see that we're blissfully walking down a dark path? What do they need to see things clearly? Another sack. All right, not that I got that off my chest and took a few minutes to meditate and calm down. I can almost understand why some people see the utility in using Vail's skills. There is no doubt that he is an effective military commander, which should be no surprise. The man is an artifact of a past, barbaric age. Yet, that's precisely why he is so dangerous. I can already see what he is trying to do: reshape the military in his own ruthless image, escalate the war in the name of victory, and if it was just that, he would be merely a dangerous element, not much different than a number of other high-ranked officers who might get ideas because of the war. However, Vail is a powerful Sith. It is in his nature to loathe the Jedi. I have no doubt whatsoever that he has plans both for the Jedi Order and the Republic as a whole, plans that, if we're lucky, we won't live to regret if we let him carry them out. With every new battle Vail wins, my fears are proven to be true. What is happening at Geonosis is beyond the pale. It's precisely what we Jedi tried our best to prevent from happening by pursuing tactics and strategies that leave both the worlds we defend and attack as intact as possible. Sooner or later we will win this war, and then it would be time to bring the separatist systems back in the fold. Every atrocity, every strike at critical infrastructure target, every civilian death the GAR causes, would make this task that much harder. Every such action binds our enemy closer together out of justified fear, hatred and the desire of vengeance. And I'm afraid that's precisely what Vale wants. He doesn't want a quick, nor clean end of the clone wars. He needs the war to expand, both in scope and ruthlessness shown by both sides. That would make him useful for longer, give him more time to subvert and corrupt not only those poor souls under his command but the Republic's military as a whole and the politicians he has regular dealings with. RK equals. Geonosis is a prime example of what will happen if we don't stop him. I've read the reports, seen the images from reconnaissance assets. The Republic Army under Vale's command is busy dismantling Geonosis infrastructure. By the time the battle is over, we will be guilty of the direct murder of millions, if not tens of millions, and in the following weeks and months, orders of magnitude more of the locals will perish due to breakdown of essential services and lack of vital supplies. This is a war crime as efficient as any other, and if there is any justice in this universe, Vale will suffer the consequences of his actions. Yet, I fear that the military high command sees only results, a world taken much more cheaply than they feared, a massive enemy fleet shattered with acceptable losses. They can't see the bigger picture, or perhaps they don't want to. We must do something, before it's too late. RK equals. It happened, I was part of it, yet I can scarcely believe it.
I find it hard to articulate how I feel right now, even harder to put into words what happened during the Senate hearing.
We went in front of the Senate after Vale returned as Mandalore, after he brought back Obi-Wan Kenobi married to the Mandalorian Duchess Satine Kryze, the Mandalorian's former leader. It was a farce, that much I can say for sure. What I can't comprehend is how did we misread the disposition of the Senate to such an extent, and what is perhaps even worse, that of the Republic's citizens. There are protests in Vale's support. The Senate itself, it's disheartening to see how many of the senators there were ready to throw their lot behind the Sith, behind the Mandalorians, as if history meant nothing to them. It is as if they don't care about the atrocities that man is trying to make standard tactic for our military. There are countless people cheering Vale for his actions at Geonosis, happy that he murdered millions. I simply can't understand it. He couldn't have influenced that many regular citizens with his mere presence, right? Yet, that's what I fear now more than anything else. If this trend continues, if the Senate, the GAR and even the regular people on the street are behind further escalation of the war, if they are happy about it and continue to reward the man who set us upon this path of ruin, then I fear for the Republic, its citizens, its very soul. RK equals. The Force help me, we're running out of time. We can't let Vale do any more damage or the Republic might never recover. People, many Jedi among them, they're simply willfully blind to the real danger. They see the obvious threat, the Confederacy with its fleets and droid armies, yet they're blind for the poisoned blade thrust into their backs. The days grow darker, more and more people cheer Vale for his monstrous acts. There are more and more demands that we respond in kind to every slight and wound the Confederacy had inflicted us or might inflict in the future. It's eye for an eye until the whole galaxy is blind and at the non-existent mercy of the Sith. Did he plan it this way from the very beginning? I am afraid, that much I can admit. In my nightmares, I see a twisted mockery of the Republic that brought the galaxy an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. I see an endless age of conflict coming, one cheered by and supported by twisted poor souls. I see a short-sighted Senate mired in graft and blind to the truth. I see it being further and further corrupted with a few good people in it being silenced by power-hungry masses. I see the very fabric of the Republic tearing as the tumor that is Vale grows and spreads. If we don't excise it soon, then there won't be a Republic to save. Instead there will be a monster wearing its skin as a twisted guise, one which we'll have to somehow put down for the good of the whole galaxy. We simply can't let it get that far, or I fear that the new Sith Wars and all the horrors of the Clone Wars will pale in comparison to what Vale and those twisted by him will wreak over the galaxy. Burning stars. RK equals. Part 3. RK equals. Flag Bridge. Republic Cruiser Victory. Nanthri. 1,000-strong fleet smoothly transitioned in real space ready to unleash Armageddon. This was the last good place for the enemy to make a stand before Gyndene, and if we reached that system we would be meeting the second prong of the attack led by my Quati counterpart. The Sis had to either attempt to defeat us in detail or risk facing our combined forces, which would mean the absolute best-case scenario would be a Pyrrhic victory for them. I want scouting parties pushed in front of the fleet, find any surprises the enemy has left for us. I ordered. We faced only token resistance since taking Rondon and defeating the Separatists' fleet there, which happened at higher price than anticipated. The bastards were learning what the Republic had forgotten during the long peace. If it wasn't for my battle meditation and the super-capital ships I had at my disposal, the enemy would have mauled my forces before going down. The losses we suffered were significant anyway, especially in view of the numerical advantage we enjoyed during that battle. That in turn made me wary. The Confederacy refused to offer open battle, and the big question was, where did they send all those ships that should have been garrisoning this part of space? It's obvious, General. One of the Quati flag officers I was stuck with exclaimed, from the CIC of his battle cruiser. They've stripped this region of space to gather the fleet we faced at Rondon and to bolster their positions in the core. We'll be able to sweep all the way to Gyndene at least without facing any meaningful opposition. That's the best-case scenario, I allowed. It was an option that what passed for our intelligence service nowadays should have caught up on. Unfortunately, the best it could be said for all but military intelligence, which was primarily concerned with the ground side of the war, Obi-Wan and company on Coruscant were still in the process of vetting people who hadn't outright defected and trying to rebuild our intel services after the coup attempt. Even worse, what we lost we had to assume the Sis had now. The Separatists will need to make a stand at Gyndene. If they can't stop us there or inflict enough damage to slow us down significantly, they will have to give up a large part of the core and thus abandon all the fixed defenses they have been building for months now. Needless to say, that would be a major waste of resources. Kenobi should be able to sweep away those installations with minimal losses if there were not enough warships to back them up. While speaking, I never averted my eyes for the tactical plot. There was precious little traffic within the system, and the only warships we could detect were the local SDF, who were busy hiding behind the orbital defenses, a number of Golan stations and 2 rings of weapons platforms. All told, we could currently detect about 50 ships of all classes, primary escorts protecting 10 cruiser variants. Even backed by the orbital defenses, those forces wouldn't be able to do more than slow us down. Give me a channel to the local leadership, both military and civilian. Preferably, my reputation was going to carry the day again and they would surrender. Set Task Forces 1 to 3 into Assault Formation Besh 1. The rest of the fleet will assume a defensive formation Aruj 5 and intervene if the Separatists decide to come out and play. We couldn't afford to simply ignore the enemy presence in this system. Doing so would be leaving a dagger pointed at our supply lines and a ready reserve for any Confederate incursion from Nixa. Link established. We've got 1 Admiral Jobau Bricks and Administrator Keela Umbra ready for you, sir. Put them on. Admiral, Administrator. I offered a polite nod to the beings whose images appeared in front of me. Bricks turned out to be an insectoid alien from a species I wasn't familiar with. He had an uncanny resemblance to an overgrown mantis with deep blue carapace. Umbra, on the other hand, was a human woman in her mid-50s. She had a weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors in the sun and wind, not something you could see among the crust of what passed for civilized leadership in this day and age. I'm General Delcatar Vale. I'm offering you 1 chance to surrender peacefully and avoid something unfortunate happening to your world. I offered them a smile that I was sure was anything but reassuring. We'll have to decline your gracious offer, General. We won't allow any hostile forces to approach Nanthri. The Admiral responded through a translator that spoke in a flat mechanical basic. You really should reconsider. You're a military man, Admiral. You know we can't leave an intact hostile force at a hyperlane junction. Stand down your ships and defenses and I can promise you, you and your crews will be treated well. Resist, and you will all die. There is nothing else to be said then, General. The Administrator said, and the connection terminated after those words. They're either crazy or know something we don't. I'm betting on the later. The fleet will keep loose formation with all ships maneuvering independently in order to avoid ramming attacks. Task Forces 1 through 3 will lead the assault on the planet. Dismantle their defenses from long range. That much should be simple in theory. I built each one of those task forces around a battlecruiser. Or star dreadnought. General, we just got a priority message. Enemy battle groups are striking all systems on the tracks tube behind us with the exception of Rondon. They decided to take a page of our playbook then. It was a good thing I've left solid detachments to hold those worlds, keep our supply route open and raid the industry in the nearby enemy systems. The downside was that there won't be any reinforcements coming until those attacks were dealt with. This is obviously a trap, so let's go and spring it. =RK equals CIC, Cis Providence Dreadnought Redemption, Nanthri. Nearly a third of the Confederacy's strategic reserve was at Nanthri, hiding behind major celestial bodies. Half of those forces stood just outside the local star's gravity well, with the rest waiting behind the largest of the two gas giants in the system, which was conveniently currently on the far end of the system in comparison to the exit of the hyper lane the enemy could use to arrive. TF-1726 was the one put in charge of the Confederacy Navy at Nanthri, and his orders were simple: he had to bleed the enemy, thus slowing them down. If the opportunity presented itself, he was to attempt a decapitation strike against the Sith in charge of the GAR fleet. What the tactical droid wasn't supposed to do was sacrifice his force. He needed to preserve it as a fleet in being at worst and thus able to threaten the enemy's flank in this system. Meanwhile, the forces within the sectors the enemy was attempting to cut off had been pulling back and biding their time until now. They had a simple mission: to fall upon and decimate the Republic's logistics train and gut it. While supercapital ships were extremely powerful assets, they did have one glaring weakness when on the offensive: every single one of them used a tremendous amount of fuel to simply move around, especially those designed and built under the restrictions the Republic had placed upon itself. That trait was less pronounced on the Corellian variant, however particularly onerous upon the larger quasi-battle cruisers and star dreadnoughts. Incidentally, the tactical droid was going to face the later. TF-1726 patiently waited for the enemy to begin their assault upon the primary populated world within the system, then sprang his trap. A decoy force made of units recalled from the slow build-up on the mid-rim front jumped to pin down the Republic battle groups attacking the planet. He then sent the fleet hiding behind the star to fix the rest of the Republic armada in place before ordering his remaining forces in action. Their target was obvious: the enemy supply ships in system. =RK equals Part 4 =RK equals CIC, Cis Providence Dreadnought Redemption, Nanthri. It was at Nanthri that TF-1726 learned a lesson in betrayal by a master of the craft, even though it took months of pondering, calculations and studying to properly comprehend it. Later, as he studied news reports, from both sides, as well as intelligence data, the tactical droid would wonder how most of the galaxy could be so blind for the truth, just as he was at the time. He would remember that lesson, and when the time came, he would put it to good use, but that would be a story for another time. At Nanthri, TF-1726 led his forces to the best of his evolving abilities, became one with a large part of his fleet and struck the enemy again and again, doing his best to maximize his own power at the points where multiple battle groups struck each other before dancing away as fast as their engines could carry them. Whole flotillas danced in and out of hyperspace, sometimes emerging right in the middle of wreckage left from earlier in the battle and taking even more damage, but that was merely the price of doing business. Unfortunately, the enemy gave as good as it received, and due to the Sith's damnable battle meditation, the coordination of the Republic forces weren't really affected by battle damage or even the loss of flagships along with the vital officers tucked on their flag bridges. In contrast, jamming, slagged communication arrays and the various tricks the enemy electronic warfare specialists could think of extracted their toll. Within mere hours, TF-1726's fleet lost nearly half its numbers and was forced to disengage or risk suffering unacceptable level of attrition. While the enemy's losses were significantly lower, Thanks to the prevalence of heavier and tougher ships on the Republic's side, the tactical droid managed to partially achieve his objective. More than half of the Republic supply train and system was either gone outright or busy making good impression of tiny, short-lived stars as fuel and Tabana gas burned. More importantly, multiple carefully preserved battle groups struck the enemy's supply train up the tracks tube, and over there was no Sith to provide the usually green escorts drawn from local PDF forces with the benefit of battle meditation. In the end, the inflicted losses weren't enough to halt the Republic offensive in its tracks. Vale would reach Gyndene just a week behind the Republic's more optimistic schedule, where TK-1726 would attempt to prevent him from threatening the Sith positions in the core. In order to do so, he would be reinforced by various system defense fleets that had avoided action and fled in front of the Republic onslaught. At that point, the tactical droid would begin to study the lesson in betrayal Vale already taught him. In hindsight, it would be clear to TF-1726 that a large reason behind the Republic offensive to reduce the Sith holdings in the Rondon-Nanthri-Gyndene triangle had little to nothing with actually winning the war. =RK= Flag Bridge, Republic Cruiser Victory, Nanthri, having a first-row seat to her master's use of battle meditation, kept Arya in both awe and a state of diligent observation for hours. She saw and felt hundreds of ships break, their crews often perishing in fire. While the battle unfolded in front of her eyes, she barely kept attention to the holographic windows showing transmitted data from many smaller engagements up the tracks tube, where the rear echelons meant to complete the encirclement of the pocket, keep it tight and ensure a steady flow of supplies, fought and died as well. All the while, she didn't have a clue what her master had concocted through his ambitious plan. Her first clue came in the form of his grim satisfaction as whole SDF contingents died trying to protect their supply train, something that obviously made no sense at all. It was only when the battle for Nanthri was practically over, and only the mop-up and SAR operations remained, that Arya dared question her master, once he gently let go of the battle meditation and slumped back in his seat. "You have questions, apprentice?" Even within his mind, his voice sounded weary and tired, yet his whole being glowed with satisfaction of a job well done. "What did you do, master?" Arya asked warily. "Me?" His voice echoed within his mind, tinted with amusement. "This." Arya made sure he knew what she meant by focusing everything she was at the data feeds from the raids upon the supply line. "The possibility was accounted for," Vale stated coyly. "We knew that the Confederacy might be reluctant to throw everything they have in the region against us in one set-piece battle. While it could have been worse, it could still get worse. The losses the rearguard battle groups already suffered are nothing to be satisfied about," Arya snapped. "They aren't?" There was no mistaking it. Her master was greatly amused at the very idea, which gave Arya a pause. Astra's mind raced. "The possibility was accounted for," Vale said. She knew that. She was in his head while the plans for the offensive were crafted. They were hastily put in place. The whole thing was rushed so much that if it wasn't for his battle meditation and the corps of ships under the command of that Quati admiral, the offensive would have turned into an unmitigated disaster already. You couldn't just pick up hundreds, or worse, in this case, thousands of ships and expect them to act as a proper fleet without weeks if not months of intensive training. However, to be fair, that wasn't what her master did, was it? The primary force concentrations expected to fight together were either the Quati or those ships under his personal command, where the battle meditation could account for the lack of training. However, that wasn't what he meant, not really, was it? Her gaze went for the tactical plot, both the one showing the current situation at Nanthri and the rest of the tracks tube. "Master, what did you do?" "Not so long, on Coruscant, we betrayed the Republic and all it stood for in order to survive this war and ensure that the future would be ours." Vale began speaking to her in a lecturing tone. "In order to build the future empire and dispense with the gross incompetence that nearly lost us this war and got us all killed more times than I care to count, certain goals must be achieved. We must force an end to the clone wars, obviously. While we are no longer in a good position to achieve a clear military victory, placing ourselves in a better position for a future round 2, that much should be within our grasp. Arya stood dumbstruck at that statement. She wasn't sure if this was the first time her master was admitting this to himself or if he had managed to conceal it from her. It was nevertheless a striking admission, especially when they were in the process of turning the war around, or so it seemed. The Confederacy isn't our only enemy. In fact, right now it isn't necessarily the most dangerous to us in the short term. Those words brought a rough picture of the strategic situation in the core. While the Confederate advance had been halted, in its aftermath, the Republic had fractured. There were relatively large forces, both ground and naval, which were for all intents and purposes neutralized, because they were too busy keeping an eye on those secessionists to be available to be deployed against the enemy. That of course meant that the Republic needed for the various SDF forces to be released for deployment en masse, which they already were thanks to the deals struck on Coruscant. Arya's eyes widened and she stared at the tactical plot through her master's eyes. He helpfully called up a constantly updating status report of the whole friendly fleet in system. 90% of the casualties suffered during the battle were SDF ships. Those fighting and dying in the tracks tube were almost exclusively SDF task forces as well. And then Arya knew, the ships doing most of the dying during the rest of this particular campaign under her master's direct command would be SDF as well, thus preserving loyal GAR units and binding them closer to their commanders who would have brought them through hell relatively intact. One of the biggest threats for our continuous well-being in the long run are our allies in the core. Her master patiently explained. By the time the dust settles and the guns lay silent, we need as many of them defanged as practical.